Marcus Webb pulled his 2009 Honda Civic into the visitor parking lot of Halloran Dynamics at 7:42 in the morning, and the engine knocked twice before it finally settled into silence. The paint on the hood had faded to a chalky bronze, and a strip of the rear bumper was held in place with black tape that had been replaced so many times it had its own texture, layered in gray. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, looking at the glass tower in front of him. 14 stories of mirrored windows reflecting a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it would rain. He was 36 years old, with the build of someone who worked with his hands more than he sat at desks, broad through the shoulders, a little thinner than he should have been because he often skipped lunch so his daughter could have the better cut of meat at dinner. His hair was cut short, practical, touched with the first threads of gray at the temples. He wore a navy blazer that had been pressed the night before on the kitchen counter because the apartment didn't have an ironing board, and underneath it a white shirt with a collar that had gone slightly soft from too many washes. He kept a black notebook in his jacket pocket, the kind with an elastic band around it, and he touched it now briefly, the way some men touch a wedding ring. He was here for a final round interview for a position titled Senior Systems Architect, a title that did not begin to describe what he actually knew how to do. Halloran Dynamics built distributed control software for power grids and water systems across 6 states, software that kept lights on in hospitals and water flowing through pipes in cities most people never thought about until something failed. Marcus had spent 11 years inside systems like these, first in the Navy, then in a series of contracting jobs that had quietly made him one of the few people in the country who understood the particular, unglamorous danger of a grid management system written across 4 different decades of code. He walked through the revolving doors at 7:51 for an 8 o'clock interview, and the receptionist, a young woman with a Bluetooth earpiece blinking blue at her collar, glanced at him, glanced past him through the glass to the parking lot, and then looked back at her screen. "Mr. Webb," she said, "Diane will be down for you." He sat in a low leather chair near a wall of monitors, showing stock tickers and a looping company reel, the same 4 sentences about innovation repeating every 90 seconds. At 8:04, a woman in a steel gray suit came through the inner doors, surveyed the lobby, and frowned slightly when her eyes settled on him, the only person waiting. Marcus Webb. "Yes, ma'am." "Diane Okafor. I run the technical interview panel." She had a firm handshake and tired eyes that suggested she had already conducted 3 interviews that week for this same role, and had not yet found anyone worth recommending. "Come on up." They rode the elevator together to the 11th floor in a silence Marcus did not try to fill. He had learned, across years of being underestimated in rooms like this one, that talking early cost him more than it gained him. The conference room had a view of the river, and around the table sat 4 people. Diane, a younger man with rolled sleeves and an enthusiasm that hadn't yet been worn down by office politics. An older man Marcus recognized from the company website as the Vice President of Infrastructure. And, at the head of the table, arriving 2 minutes after everyone else, the company's Chief Executive Officer, a woman named Renata Callaway. Renata Callaway was 44, sharp-featured, with dark hair cut into a precise bob that did not move when she did. She wore a black suit with no visible logo, the kind of expensive that didn't announce itself, and a watch that did. She had built Halloran Dynamics from a 14-person engineering shop into a $400 million company over 9 years, and she had done it, by her own account in 3 different magazine profiles, by trusting her instincts about people within the first 90 seconds of meeting them. She glanced at Marcus's resume on the tablet in front of her, then glanced at him, then out the window toward the parking lot, where, from this height, his Civic was visible among a row of luxury sedans and SUVs like a small, dull stone among polished ones. "Is that your car?" she asked, not quite a question. "The one with the tape on the bumper?" The younger man with the rolled sleeves laughed before he caught himself, a short, surprised sound, and then looked down at his notes. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. "It gets me here." "I'm sure it does." Renata's mouth curved not unkindly exactly, but with the particular condescension of someone who believed appearance was a fair proxy for competence, who had built her worldview on watches and suits and parking spaces. "We work with grid systems for power and water across half a dozen states, Mr. Webb. Our clients are utilities, municipalities, hospital networks." I need to know that the person managing those systems projects a certain level of, let's call it operational seriousness. I understand. Your resume says 11 years in systems architecture for different employers, 2 of them government contracts I can't fully verify because they're classified. She set the tablet down. That's a hard story to read. It could mean you're very good. It could also mean you don't stay anywhere long enough for people to find out you're not. Diane shifted slightly in her chair, the only sign of discomfort at the table. The vice president of infrastructure said nothing. His face neutral, professional. The face of a man who had survived office politics by never showing an opinion before his boss had shown hers first. With respect, Marcus said, I can walk you through the architecture of any system I've worked on, line by line right now if that would help. That's not necessary. Renata's smile had thinned. I think we have what we need. She stood, smoothing her jacket. Diane will follow up. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Webb. Drive safe. The interview had lasted 11 minutes. Marcus rode the elevator down alone. He did not check his phone in the lobby, did not let his jaw tighten until he was back inside the Civic with the door closed. And even then he simply sat for a moment, looking at his own hands on the wheel, the same hands that had once, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday 18 months ago, rebuilt the failover logic for a regional water treatment system in Ohio after a contractor's software update had silently corrupted 4 control modules. Hands that had stopped a chain reaction that would have left 40,000 homes without clean water for a week. Work no one but 3 engineers and a relieved city manager had ever known about, because that was the nature of the work. It was good when no one noticed. He started the engine. It knocked twice, then caught. He drove home to the apartment he shared with his daughter, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building with a slow elevator, and a landlord who was, on the whole, fair. His daughter, Olive, was 8 years old, with 2 missing teeth at the front that she was self-conscious about and proud of in equal measure, and a habit, since she was 4, of carrying a small smooth river stone in her pocket, gray with a single white vein running through it, which he called her quiet stone, because her mother had given it to her the year before she died, told her to hold it when the world got loud, and it would get quiet again. Olive had it with her always, transferred from pocket to pocket, washed and dried by hand, because she did not trust the washing machine with it. She was at the kitchen table when Marcus came in, drawing a horse with 6 legs, because she had decided regular horses were too slow. How did it go? She asked, not looking up. It went the way it goes, Marcus said, which was their private shorthand for a thing that had not gone well, but was not worth dwelling on. Did you wear the blazer? I wore the blazer. Then it's not your fault, Olive said, with the particular confidence of an 8-year-old delivering an unassailable verdict, and went back to her horse. He made dinner, pasta with the sauce she liked, the kind from the jar with too much basil, and listened to her tell him about a substitute teacher who had let the class watch a documentary about octopuses. And for 40 minutes, the interview did not exist at all. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and the soft blue light of 3 job boards open in separate tabs. And he applied to 2 more positions before midnight, careful, methodical, the same way he debugged a system, looking for the place where the next opportunity might actually fit. What he did not know, what no one inside Halloran Dynamics yet knew, was that 19 days later their entire grid monitoring platform, the system underpinning contracts with 11 municipal utilities and 3 hospital networks across 4 states, would begin failing in a way that no one inside the company could explain, and that the only person who had ever seen this particular failure before, who had in fact written the obscure patch 8 years earlier that the company's current engineers had unknowingly built directly on top of, without understanding its dependencies, was a man with a taped bumper who had been dismissed in 11 minutes because of how he looked next to a row of clean cars. For 3 weeks, life continued in its ordinary rhythm. Marcus picked up 2 short-term contracts, neither using a fraction of what he knew, fixing a logistics company's inventory database and patching a small clinic's appointment scheduling software, work that paid the rent but did not engage the part of his mind that had spent over a decade learning to listen to systems the way other people listen to language. He drove Olive to school each morning in a Civic, the same knock in the engine, the same tape on the bumper, and on Saturdays they went to the public library, where Olive read mystery novels meant for readers twice her age and Marcus read engineering journals because 3 different used copies were cheaper than a single new one, and because some part of him kept preparing for an opportunity he could not yet see. On a Tuesday in late October, at 3:14 in the morning, the regional grid monitoring dashboard at Halloran Dynamics began returning malformed telemetry from substations across 2 states. The first alert was small, a single sensor flagged as unresponsive in a county outside Tulsa. By 3:40, 14 substations were reporting the same error, and by 4:15, the entire failover logic of the platform had begun cascading false positives, shutting down load balancing routines that were, in fact, functioning correctly, because the system believed they were not. By 6 a.m., when the on-call engineering team finally escalated the issue to a full incident, 3 hospital networks had lost real-time visibility into their backup power systems, and 1 municipal water authority in eastern Oklahoma had its entire control interface go dark. Renata Callaway was in a meeting with 2 investors at 7:50 when her vice president of infrastructure, the same man who had sat silent through Marcus's interview, knocked on the glass door of the conference room with an expression that told her, before he said a word, that something was badly wrong. "We have total visibility failure across the grid platform," he said, the moment the investors had been ushered out with apologies. 11 clients affected. Mercy General in Tulsa just called. They want to know if their backup generators will actually engage if the grid drops, and we can't tell them, because we can't see anything. "How long has this been going on?" "Since just after 3. We've had 4 engineers on it for hours. They don't know what's wrong. They keep finding the same patch buried 8 layers down in the failover module, something written years ago, undocumented, and every time they try to work around it, 3 other things break." "Who wrote it?" The vice president hesitated because he had already looked, and he already knew the answer would not be one Renata wanted to hear, given the context. But there was no version of this morning in which lying would help either of them. "A contractor. 8 years ago. Name's Marcus Webb." Renata's face did not change, not in any way the vice president could read, but something behind her eyes recalculated, fast, the way a person's expression shifts when a piece of furniture they had walked past 100 times turns out to be load-bearing. "The interview," she said. "The one with the car." "Yes. Get him on the phone." It took 2 calls and a slightly panicked voicemail from Diane Okafor before Marcus, sitting at his kitchen table grading his own freelance invoice for the inventory database job, picked up his cell phone and heard a voice he recognized immediately, stripped of all the condescension from 3 weeks earlier, replaced by something flatter and more urgent. "Mr. Webb, this is Diane Okafor from Halloran Dynamics. I am sorry to call like this. We have a critical system failure affecting power grid monitoring and a water authority, and your name came up in connection with a legacy module in our failover architecture. Is there any chance you'd be willing to come in today as a consultant paid hourly to help us understand what's happening?" Marcus looked across the room, where Olive was at the table doing math homework, her quiet stone sitting beside her pencil case the way it always did when she worked, a small gray anchor at the edge of her concentration. "I need an hour," Marcus said. "I have to find someone to watch my daughter." He called the woman down the hall, a retired schoolteacher named Pearl who watched Olive twice a month already and never asked for more than gas money. And within 50 minutes he was walking back through the revolving doors of Halloran Dynamics, this time past a lobby full of people speaking too quickly into phones, this time waved upstairs without anyone glancing at the parking lot. The same conference room, the same view of the river, except now there were 6 laptops open and a wall-mounted screen full of red error states, and the same 4 people from the interview were there, joined now by 2 younger engineers Marcus had never met, both of them with a gray, sleep-deprived look of people who had been awake since 3 a.m. Renata Callaway stood when he entered. She did not extend her hand immediately. "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming." "What's the current state?" Marcus said, already moving toward the screen, already reading the error log rather than the room. One of the younger engineers, a woman named Priya with her hair pulled back hastily and a coffee cup she had clearly forgotten about, began explaining, fast, anxious, that the failover module had begun returning telemetry that contradicted itself across redundant nodes, that they had tried rolling back 3 different versions and the contradiction persisted, that they had begun to suspect the problem wasn't in the recent code at all. Marcus pulled a chair to the nearest open laptop without asking permission, scrolled through the error log for 90 seconds in total silence, and then asked for the raw configuration file for the failover module's synchronization layer. Priya pulled it up. Marcus read it the way another person might read a paragraph they had written themselves a long time ago and half forgotten, his eyes moving down the structure, recognizing the shape of his own logic from 8 years earlier. A redundancy check he had built for a different client entirely, one that had apparently been folded wholesale into Halloran's platform during an acquisition no one in this room had been present for. This module assumes a 3-node consensus model, Marcus said, mostly to himself. It was built for a system with 3 redundant data centers. You've scaled to 7 without updating the consensus threshold. When more than 3 nodes report telemetry within the same cycle, the module doesn't know how to resolve the disagreement, so it defaults to treating everything as a fault. That can't be it, said the other engineer, a man named Bryce, defensive in the specific way of someone whose code might be implicated. We tested the synchronization layer extensively when we scaled. You tested whether it scaled, Marcus said, without heat, without raising his voice at all, not whether the consensus logic understood what scaling meant. It's still counting to 3. He did not argue further. He simply opened a blank terminal window, and for the next 40 minutes, while the room watched in a silence that slowly shifted from skepticism to something closer to held breath, he rewrote the consensus threshold logic directly, adjusting it to dynamically calculate quorum based on active node count rather than a hard-coded assumption, testing it first against a sandboxed mirror of the live system that Priya, working alongside him now with quiet, focused efficiency, helped spin up in real time. At 11:52 a.m., they pushed the patch to the failover module in a controlled rollout, watching the error log on the wall screen. The red began clearing, substation by substation, the way ice clears from a windshield under a defroster, slow at first, and then all at once. By 12:10, all 14 substations near Tulsa reported clean telemetry. By 12:30, the Water Authority's control interface came back online, and a man's voice, audibly relieved, came through Bryce's headset thanking them, asking what had happened. Marcus sat back in his chair for the first time in nearly an hour and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He did not explain what he'd done beyond the technical summary Priya was already typing into the incident report. He did not look around the room for acknowledgement. He simply closed the laptop the way he always did, the work itself being its own quiet satisfaction, a feeling no one in the room could see on his face, but that sat there nonetheless, settled and certain. It was Diane who broke the silence first. That was a 3-node consensus model, she said slowly, almost to herself. Built for a system that doesn't exist here anymore. No one's looked at that module in years because no one knew it was still load-bearing. It's load-bearing for the whole platform, Marcus said. Every utility you service depends on that synchronization layer agreeing with itself. Renata had not spoken in nearly an hour. She stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the last of the red clear from the screen, and when she finally turned around, her expression was the particular kind of stillness that comes before someone has to say something they don't have practiced language for. You wrote the original module, she said, 8 years ago. For a different client. Before the acquisition, I guess. I didn't know it ended up here. And 3 weeks ago, I had you in this room, and I asked about your car. Marcus did not answer immediately. He had learned, over many years of being underestimated, that silence in this particular moment was not weakness, it was simply accuracy, a refusal to either soften what had happened or make it bigger than it needed to be. You did, he said finally. Renata looked at the room, at Priya and Bryce and the vice president and Diane, all of them watching her now, and something in her face shifted, not quite humility, not yet, but the early architecture of it, the moment before a person decides whether to protect their ego or correct their mistake. I'd like to speak with you privately, she said to Marcus. If you have a time. They went to her office, glass-walled but with the blinds drawn halfway, a long view of the river beyond her desk, and a single framed photograph turned slightly away from visitors, a habit Marcus recognized because he had the same instinct with photographs of Olive's mother. I'm going to say something, and I'd like you to let me finish before you respond, Renata said, sitting on the edge of her desk rather than behind it. 11 years ago, before any of this, she gestured vaguely at the window at the building. I started this company in a basement with 2 other engineers, and a loan from my father that I have never fully paid back, not because he wouldn't let me, but because some part of me has never stopped being afraid he was right not to trust me with it the first time he said no. I built a habit early on of deciding things fast, about people, about deals, because moving fast made me feel like I deserved to be in the room. I have made very good decisions that way. I have also made decisions like the one I made 3 weeks ago with you, and I didn't think about it again until this morning, when I realized that decision could have cost 3 hospitals their backup power visibility for an entire day, because I let how a person's car looked tell me what I thought I needed to know about whether they could do the job. She paused, and for a moment her composure, the version of herself built for investor meetings and magazine profiles, slipped just slightly, enough that Marcus could see, briefly, a tired and uncertain person underneath it. My father drove a truck with a cracked windshield for 9 years after he started his own contracting business, because he put every spare dollar back into the company instead of into himself. I knew that. I have always known that. I still did what I did 3 weeks ago, and I'm not going to pretend that was anything other than exactly what it looked like. I appreciate you saying that, Marcus said, because it was true, and because he had no interest in either accepting an apology that wasn't sincere or rejecting one that was. I'd like to offer you the senior systems architect position, Renata said. Not as a favor, not as an apology, though God knows I owe you one regardless. I'd like to offer it because you understand a part of this platform's architecture that no one currently on staff does, and because what you did in that conference room in under an hour, 3 of my engineers could not have done in 3 days. The salary will reflect that. So will the apology separately, because they're not the same thing, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to buy my way out of having been wrong. Marcus considered this for a long moment, not because he doubted the offer, but because he had learned, across many years of contract work and short-term positions, to be careful about decisions made in the heat of someone else's crisis. I'd want to see the full scope of the platform's architecture before I commit to anything, he said. Not because I doubt what happened today, but because I don't make decisions about my daughter's stability based on one good morning. That's fair, Renata said. More than fair. And I'd want it in writing that the consensus model gets a full audit, not just a patch. What I did today bought you time. It didn't fix the underlying assumption that no one updates legacy modules when they acquire new systems. That's a process problem, not a code problem. And it'll happen again somewhere else if nothing changes. Something in Renata's expression shifted again, this time closer to genuine respect, the kind that did not require a watch or a parking space to recognize. I'll have legal draft both today, she said. There was a company-wide meeting 2 days later, called in the same conference room where the interview had happened, the same room where the red error log had cleared on the wall screen, now filled with nearly 30 engineers and managers standing along the walls because there were not enough chairs. Renata stood at the front, and she did not soften the story for the room. 3 weeks ago, she said, I interviewed a candidate for a role we badly needed filled, and I made a decision about his competence based on the car he drove in front of 3 of my colleagues in 11 minutes without giving him a fair chance to demonstrate what he actually knew. 2 days ago, this same man identified and fixed a structural flaw in our failover architecture that none of us had found, a flaw that had been sitting undetected for years and that, left alone, could have caused outages affecting 11 municipalities and 3 hospital systems for far longer than it did. I want to be clear with all of you that the lesson I'm taking from this isn't just about cars or appearances or any single bias. It's that I built a habit of confidence that protected my ego far more often than it protected good decisions. And today, I'm telling you that habit cost this company nearly a full day of visibility into systems that, frankly, people's safety depends on. I'm grateful it wasn't worse. I'm grateful Mr. Webb agreed to help us anyway, despite how badly we treated him on his way out the door 3 weeks ago. He's joining the team as Senior Systems Architect starting next week. And I'd ask every one of you to give him the kind of welcome that the work he's already done for this company has earned. The applause that followed was not loud or performative. It was a kind of applause that comes from a room full of engineers who understood, in specific and technical terms, exactly what had nearly happened and exactly what had been required to prevent it, and who respected competence more than they respected charisma. Marcus stood near the back of the room, in the same blazer, the elastic-banded notebook in his pocket, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed adding to what had already been said. That evening, he drove home in the Civic, the engine still knocking twice before settling, the tape on the bumper still holding, because some things did not need to change just because his circumstances had, and he found Olive at the kitchen table drawing a new horse, this one with only 4 legs, a small concession to realism she occasionally allowed herself. "How did it go?" she asked. The same question, the same flat effect of an 8-year-old who had learned that asking with too much enthusiasm sometimes embarrassed her father. "It went well," Marcus said, sitting down across from her. "Really well." Olive looked up properly this time, registering something different in his voice. "Like good? Or good like you usually say?" Good, Marcus said. "I have a new job. A real one. Starting next week." Olive considered this with the gravity she gave most pronouncements, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the smooth gray stone with a single white vein, turning it over once in her fingers before setting it down gently on the table between them, a small ceremonial gesture she had developed without anyone teaching her to. "Mom would have held this for you," she said, "if she could. So I'm holding it for both of us." Marcus reached across the table and closed his hand briefly over hers, over the stone, not lifting it, just resting there for a moment. The kitchen quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the scratch of Olive's pencil resuming its work on the horse's mane. Outside, the evening light moved slowly across the parking lot below their building, falling at last across the hood of the old Civic parked in its usual spot near the curb, the chalky bronze paint catching the last of the sun, the strip of black tape on the bumper holding steady, unremarkable, exactly as it had been every day before, and exactly as it would be tomorrow morning when he drove it, without hesitation or apology, through the gates of a company that had finally learned to see him.